If you put Silent Hill, Stephen King, H.P. Lovecraft, and Twin Peaks all in a blender to see what kind of horror, thriller, mystery concoction was produced, you'd get Alan Wake. Released in 2010, almost every aspect of this game was met with critical acclaim. The tense and spooky atmosphere, the balance between quiet treks through environmental storytelling and intense skirmishes with the horrors of the dark, the soundtrack composed of both licensed works and original pieces, and finally the aspect that stuck with me for the past 13 years since its release.
Yes! Yes! Come to pop!
The story. Remedy Entertainment pulled out all the stops when it came to crafting the world of Alan Wake. The narrative builds on itself with more and more webs of dark lore and mystery as it progresses. The developers are adamant the game isn't solely a horror game, and I'd agree. It's a near perfect combination of mystery, thriller, and horror all in one experience. So, in celebration of spooky season and the release of Alan Wake 2,
I hope it doesn't suck!
Let's take a trip to the small, unsuspecting town of Bright Falls and explore its dark, twisted secrets. So go ahead, grab yourself a snack, stock up on your product, place Energizer batteries for your flashlight, and whatever you do, keep the lights on. Our story kicks off with a quote from Stephen King about how over-explaining can ruin the fun of a horror story. Our protagonist, Alan Wake, is a writer.
My name is Alan Wake. I'm a writer.
He's the best-selling author of crime fiction novels starring the character Alex Casey, which is basically another version of the protagonist from Remedy's previous games, Max Payne. Alan has been experiencing writer's block for 2 years, unable to release any new works. When we first meet up with him, he's dreaming of a desperate attempt to reach a lighthouse. He can't remember why he needs to go there, only that it's urgent. He's driving way too fast to be attentive, and suddenly,
I'd seen the hitchhiker too late.
Alan laments over the body of the man he'd just run over, worried about going to jail and being separated from his wife when the car's headlights go out. He turns back to the body, only to see that it's disappeared. Once Alan reaches the steps, he turns back to see the silhouette of the man he'd just killed standing once again by his car, and in the blink of an eye he appears right in the player's face.
You don't even recognize me, do you, Ryder?
Getting past this encounter, we see the hitchhiker explode into a cyclone of physical darkness and anger. As Alan nears the lighthouse, the whirlwind of darkness returns, stronger than before. Now it's throwing cars and other large objects at Alan, doing everything it can to keep him from reaching his destination. We finally make it inside, thank God. But like dreams do, this one comes to an abrupt end. The lighthouse loses power, and the darkness Evil Deads its way in to finally take Alan. With the darkness enveloping his dream, we hear a woman's voice.
He's here.
The dream segment comes to an end at the sound of Alan's wife, Alice's voice. She's woken him up to let him know they've finally arrived at their vacation destination, Bright Falls. The Wakes are traveling here to take a break from their life in New York City, and Alan couldn't be happier to get away from a world that constantly badgers him about when he'll write his next book. First order of business, pick up the key to the cabin we're renting from the landlord, Carl Stuckey, a local mechanic. Alan heads to the Oh Dear Diner to meet him, while Alice leaves to go find a better facial animation rendering.
I'm looking for...
Mr. Wake. Alan Wake.
Oh, God!
We also meet 2 retired rock stars, Tor and Odin. Another diner patron, Park Ranger Rusty, informs us that the Anderson brothers are actually escaped patients from a nearby psychiatric clinic who somehow got away, but their doctor is on his way over to pick them up and take them back. On our way back to the men's room, we see a lady, who definitely doesn't look like the log lady from Twin Peaks, clutching a lamp and peering into the dark hallway.
Don't go in there, young man. You can hurt yourself in the dark.
She says she warned Carl not to go into the dark, but he didn't listen, and now he hasn't come back out. Look, lady, Alan's here to make love to his wife in an Airbnb and chew bubblegum, and he's all out of bubblegum. So our boy walks right past her to harass the landlord for the key. Alan knocks on the bathroom door to no answer. Instead, out of the darkness, a woman in black appears beside him.
Carl couldn't make it. Unfortunately, he was taken ill. But I have the key for you and instructions on how to get to the lake.
A little confused since he was told Carl was the landlord, Alan still accepts. The lady in black hands over the key and promises to stop by later to check on the couple.
I insist.
and most certainly interrupt their night of romantic escapades. Alan reunites with Alice back outside, where she reveals she did not find a better facial rendering, but she did pick up some flashlights just in case they're in a video game that requires them for its combat mechanics. Setting off with their cabin key and directions, the Wakes are in too much of a hurry to get their 50 Shades on to notice Carl Stuckey stumble out of the diner behind them, holding his head as though he'd just woken up and yelling,
"Hey, wait! Mrs. Wake! Your keys!"
The Wakes arrive at Diver's Isle to settle into their cabin. As the sun starts to set, Alan reveals through narration that Alice has an intense fear of the dark, hence her side quest earlier to go get some flashlights. As we walk up, we get our first look at Chekhov's birds, inspired by Hitchcock's 1963 horror film, The Birds. This game is chock full of foreshadowing, and things that seem irrelevant at first almost always come into play in a more important way later. I'll stop using the Chekhov reference, but just know the writers of this game made dang sure to include things that foreshadow or serve a later purpose all over the place. This makes subsequent playthroughs that much more enjoyable in my opinion. If you look around the cabin, you find a photograph of the dock outside with someone in a diver's suit standing on it and a box of books written by someone named Thomas Zane. On the way to turn on the generator, Alan spots a carving of 2 initials inside of a heart on a tree stump and says,
The island had once been the site for a love story. Maybe it would be that again.
That's right, Alan. With that attitude, anything is possible.
The power cable goes to that shed over there.
Alright, not off to a great start, but the night is young. The sun begins to set. Alice calls to Alan from the upstairs bedroom, saying she has a surprise for him. This is it, boys. The hours of driving, paying the cabin's rent, paying the cleaning fees, they're all about to pay off. Go get her, Alan.
Finally!
Well, hello there.
I'm not the surprise. It's in the study. Go take a look.
Alan walks into the other room with a fresh set of blue balls to find Alice has brought him a typewriter.
Surprise!
Alice? What is this?
She was hoping he'd start writing again while they were there. Her reason for suggesting they vacation in Bright Falls has become clear. The power starts to short.
Take that. That's not... Alan? Alan?
Enraged and betrayed, Alan ignores Alice's concerns over the lights going out and storms out of the cabin. While outside, the power finally gives out completely.
Alice? Alice!
Alice's screams start to sound less like someone afraid of the dark and more like someone being attacked.
Alice? Alice?
Frantic, Alan searches for her, only to find the outside railing broken. Peering down into the dark water, he sees what appears to be Alice sinking to the depths of the lake. Alan, being a much better man than me after the stunt she pulled, dives into the water after her without hesitation. The screen goes black. An unspecified amount of time passes, and we see Alan waking up behind the wheel of his crashed car with a wound to his head. In the back of the car is the book The Creator's Dilemma by Dr. Emil Hartman, the psychologist Alice had wanted Alan to see. Alan can see the lights of a nearby gas station and decides to head towards it. On the way, a bright flashing light briefly appears, and pieces of paper with writing on them land on the ground. Upon inspection of these pieces of paper, they're manuscript pages for a book called Departure, with Alan Wake named as the author. Alan has zero memory of ever writing these pages or this story, but he knows that's what he wanted to name his next book. Throughout the game, Alan will find these collectible pages and be able to read them. They're basically what you'd likely read if this entire game were a novel. They provide foreshadowing of events to come and descriptions of events Alan is not present for in order to add backstory and characterization. Alan has to pass through the lumberyard to get to the gas station. Upon arrival, he sees the landlord, Carl Stuckey, pulling an axe out of a corpse and looking just like the possessed hitchhiker from his dream.
Carl Stuckey. Pleased to meet you.
Carl Stuckey chases Alan into a nearby shed and gives us a nice Shining reference as he slams the axe into the door. Alan finds a revolver.
During your trying
Alan is forced to fight off members of the lumberyard workers who also have what appears to be darkness spilling from them like ink and water. Alan is able to defeat them, first light, then lead. Stuckey, who's been stalking us this whole time, finally reveals himself for a fight. He's extremely fast, but once you're finally able to hit him with enough light, he's no match for your newly acquired shotgun. At the gas station, we see the deer float from the beginning once more, and a sign that says Deerfest is 1 week away. Deerfest had been 2 weeks away when Alan and Alice had arrived in Bright Falls, meaning it had likely been a week since Alan had jumped into the lake after Alice, and he could remember none of it. Alan uses the phone in the gas station to call the police. Alan immediately starts yelling about his wife being missing since they got to their cabin on Cauldron Lake, but the sheriff responds,
"There's no island on Cauldron Lake, not since the big eruption in the 70s.
Alan agrees to go with her to the police station if he can show her the cabin they were staying at first. She agrees, and they drive to the lake. The sheriff had been telling the truth. There is no cabin on Cauldron Lake. Chapter 2 begins with a flashback to the Wake's New York City apartment. The snowstorm outside causes the power to go out, so Alan and Alice take their flashlights and candles to the couch. The blackout has cemented its place as the ultimate wingman. Alice apologizes for her fear of the dark and says it's just something she can't control. To console her, Alan tells her a story of when he was young. His mom gave him an old broken light switch she called the clicker. Little Alan believed if he just hit the switch, it would light up and make all the monsters in the dark go away. And with one reveal that he's still got that clicker from his childhood, Alan has achieved ultimate Riz. Back to the present day, Alan's concussion and head wound are being checked up on by Bright Springs doctor, Dr. Nelson. Alan's trying not to be thrown in a padded cell, so he decides to keep everything to himself for now.
Thank you for testing the lights, Miss Weaver. Everything seems to be fine.
I don't have the luxury of being complacent, Deputy Grant. The bulbs will need changing soon. You can't change them in the dark.
Sheriff Breaker gives Alan his now fully charged cell phone and asks him about the night's events. While still in her office, Alan gets a call from an unknown number.
Alan, please help me.
Alice?
Stop talking to the law. You'll do exactly what I say if you ever want to see your wife again.
Barry, Alan's agent, calls.
Barry?
Ow! Ow! Thank God! Where the hell have you been? I've been trying to reach you for a week, you and Alice. I've been worried sick. I flew out yesterday. I'm here in Bright Falls.
On his way to the front exit, Alan runs into Dr. Emil Hartman, the psychiatrist who convinced Alice to bring Alan to Bright Falls in the first place, so he might check into his clinic. Alan decks him right in front of the sheriff. Sure, being locked up for saying you defended yourself from possessed people the night before is bad, but being locked up for assault in broad daylight, that is A-okay. Amidst the scuffle, we finally get our first proper introduction to the true protagonist of this story.
Nobody move! Get your hands off of my client!
Who are you?
I'm Barry Wheeler, his agent.
That was a joke, not a spoiler, I promise. Alan and Barry leave to go rent a cabin in the national park, putting them right in the vicinity of Lover's Peak, where the kidnapper wants to meet with Alan. Barry does not believe Alan, but he's extremely interested in hearing that his client has finally written something after 2 years of writer's block. Outside, Rusty is tending to a hurt good boy and warns us about someone in the park setting illegal bear traps in the area, and gives Alan a key to one of the cabins for the night, along with directions on how to get to Lover's Peak.
Just follow the paths, you'll get to it eventually. It's an easy walk. Nice spot, too.
Rusty also mentions there are a lot of campers staying in the park that they have not heard from in some time. I'm sure they're fine, Rusty. I'm sure they're fine. Closing in on the visitor center, Alan gets a vision. If that weren't creepy enough, here's what we're greeted by when we enter the visitor center. Something is knocking over trees and demolishing buildings. Something powerful. Inside, we find Rusty.
Oh, hell. It happened. Just the way it was on that page.
Rusty begs us to get the lights back on and gives Alan the key to the office. Arriving at the breaker box, we discover someone slammed an axe straight through it, ensuring the power will stay off. It was a diversion. Defeating some taken hunters, presumably the ones Rusty had mentioned were missing, we see the back wall has been smashed through and Max the dog is dead? I'd take it all back, this game sucks. 0 out of 10.
Obey the Park Ranger's instructions at all times.
Rusty? Rusty, no!
He's not only able to walk now, but he can run. If one good thing comes from this attack on the visitor center, it's that Barry saw it from the cabin.
I saw it from the window. I saw something.
Forget about it, Barry. It's just me going crazy.
As we cross a chasm in a pulley lift, a swarm of taken birds attack. Just as he's about to be overcome by a group of taken. It's the camo-clad guy from the ferry. He tells Wake to hurry up and hands him some flares. Alan lost his weapons, but this guy's got one.
There was no way this was a coincidence. He was the kidnapper.
He refuses to hand over his revolver, so we spend the next segment protecting him with our flashlight and flares while he finishes off the Taken enemies that appear. After a standoff with a few swarms of Taken, the man reveals he is the kidnapper that we're here to meet.
You're gonna bring about something glorious and terrible once we get you some proper editorial control.
What the hell are you talking about? Where's Alice?
I want the entire manuscript, or she's gonna suffer bad.
Knuckles Magoo does what he does best, and they both topple off the side, the kidnapper escaping in the process. Moving through a mill, we learn that the police are already investigating the disappearance of all the lumberyard workers from the night before, and we get a heads up that the birds are going to attack Barry while he's still hiding in the cabin. In line with the page we found, Barry calls and says,
"Ow! The porch is covered with birds. They've got all Hitchcock on me."
Stay out of sight. I'm on my way. Don't open the door.
The kidnapper calls once more.
I don't... Listen. I'm gonna need time to finish it. I still need to write the ending. I need... a week.
It's not done?
I need a week.
2 days. The old Bright Falls coal mine is nearby. You can find it easy, city boy. The main building, there at noon. You bring the manuscript, you'll get your wife. If not, well, get me.
We arrive at the cabin and see that Barry's fears were well founded. Hundreds of birds are flying around, and the player is forced to use flares, the flare gun, and the flashlight to drive off multiple flocks of them. The birds defeated, Alan and Barry reunite in the cabin.
Hey, Al. I'm sorry for thinking you were having a psychotic episode, man.
The next morning, Barry heads into town to try and figure out the identity of the kidnapper, while Alan stays at the cabin to try and write an ending to the manuscript. The writer's block is still in full effect, however, so he's not able to write a single word. While Alan laments that not even supernatural threats can get him past his writer's block, Barry gets a call from Rose the barista.
This is Rose.
Rose?
I found Mr. Wake's pages.
Oh, you sweet, brilliant girl.
Could you and Mr. Wake come get them? I live in the trailer park outside the town.
We'll be there in less than an hour.
Bye now.
See you soon.
Have a great day. Hope you come back soon. Welcome to the Oh Dear
Diner.
Good girl.
Rose, frozen in a blank smile, is now under the influence of the darkness, and has just laid a trap for Alan Wake. When we arrive to the trailer park that Rose lives in at the beginning of Chapter 3, we get sort of an exposition dump from Barry now that he's back from talking to some townspeople. I'll summarize it as best I can, but bear with me here. There are a lot of local legends about Cauldron Lake that involve disappearances and other spooky stuff. While the lake is technically the opening of a dormant volcano, the Native Americans in the area believe it is a door to another world of unimaginable horrors. Back in the 1970s, a local poet named Thomas Zane, wink wink, used to dive there all the time from the dock at his cabin, so they started calling the spot around it Diver's Isle. The story goes that his lover, Barbara Jagger, was his muse, his primary inspiration for the poems he would write. Hence the carving of the initials TZ and BJ on the tree stump we saw in Chapter 1 behind the cabin. One day, Barbara drowned in the lake during a swim, and her body was never recovered. This was odd though, because Barbara, who was 25 at the time, was known to be a good swimmer. A week later, the volcano under the lake erupted, causing Thomas's cabin and Diver's Isle to sink and flood some nearby mining tunnels. Tom was never seen again, and presumed to have died in the eruption. Now the locals tell stories of the scratching hag, Barbara Jagger, now appearing as an old lady in black funeral garb that haunts the woods and scares children in the dark. Oddly enough, although the locals think of Tom as a famous poet, there's not any record of his works or disappearance in Bright Falls anywhere, except for some articles written by a Cynthia Weaver. Miss Weaver is now known as the Lamp Lady, cautioning everyone in town to keep the lights on at all times. Maybe she's onto something.
Welcome to... Oh dear, Mr. Wake. I'm so glad you're here.
Rose, you have my manuscript?
Oh yes. Yes. Please, come in.
She offers them some coffee and they oblige.
Hey, Al. Al, what's... Oh.
Barry!
Rose has apparently spiked their coffee with some of the good stuff, and as Alan fades from consciousness, Rose smiles on. Alan enters a dreamlike state surrounded by darkness.
It's coming for you, hiding in my barber's skin. I'm too weak to stop it. You must turn the lights on.
This is the voice of Thomas Zane. Right on cue, the dark presence appears in the likeness of Barbara Jagger and tells Alan,
"You must finish what you started."
Alan wakes up.
Back to work, boy.
Rising from Rose's bed, we see she wasn't kidding. She really is an Alan Wake superfan. On the way out, Alan passes by the still unconscious Barry, and Rose, who's still in a catatonic state, rocking herself on the floor.
You're right. I deserve more money. I'm so handsome.
Welcome to the Oh Dear Diner. What can I get you today? Coffee?
Alan's been unconscious for a whole day and now only has 12 hours until the next meeting with Alice's kidnapper. As we get to the parking lot, we see red and blue lights. The landlord has called the police. FBI agent Nightingale, an absolutely cartoonish, over-the-top caricature of a bloodthirsty bad cop, rolls up and immediately starts taking shots at Alan.
This is Agent Nightingale, FBI! Get him up, Hemingway! You're under arrest! You move a muscle, I'll unload right in your face! Stay right where you are, Slade!
When the sheriff asks why the FBI is even after Alan Wake, his only answer is federal business. The police, under Nightingale's command, are after Alan. We're forced to sprint through the woods, dodging gunfire and flashlight beams wherever we can. But if one force chasing us isn't enough, trees start to crackle. A very ominous scene unfolds beneath Alan while he's on a path. The police are shooting up flares for visibility, and you can see their flashlights moving between all the foliage. The darkness roars, and some of the officers start to scream. Can you guess who our next batch of Taken to fight tonight is going to be? Alan works his way through some Taken officers, who are now spouting off lines like, Side note, some of these Taken police officers are huge. No wonder Bright Falls never had to worry about crime. I mean, imagine that monster of a human chasing you down for jaywalking. Alan makes it to the radio station and we interrupt Pat's broadcast.
Oh, here's a little surprise. The famous writer Alan Wake just walked in.
At absolute light speed, Nightingale and the Goof Troop show up at the station for another round of let's shoot near the civilians.
Nowhere to run now, Dan Brown.
Pat Main and Sheriff Breaker try to calm the situation, but neither of them got the memo that Nightingale is an insufferably written character, so he fires off some rounds anyway. Alan never gets the chance to ask Pat how to get to the coal mines. Approaching the rail yard, Alan gets a call.
Hello?
He's the most stubborn man I've ever met.
Alice? Alice?
Alan, I'm so afraid. He keeps me in the dark. Please help me.
On the way to grab a truck, we have a boss encounter with a Taken tractor. Sounds ridiculous, I know, but this thing acts like a bull, charging at you and doing a lot of damage if it makes contact. Once it's defeated, you get behind the wheel of a vehicle, the sun starts to come up. At this point, Alan knows he's not going to finish the manuscript, so he's planning on just holding the kidnapper at gunpoint and trying to force him to give up Alice. If you come across a radio in this section, Pat Main actually apologizes on air.
And if someone I met last night is listening, let me just say, I'm sorry if my mouth got you in trouble.
It's almost noon. Time to meet the kidnapper again. We learn from a manuscript page that the kidnapper's name is actually Mott. And apparently, he'd already known who Alan and Alice were back when they were all on the ferry together. He was sent there by his boss to report their arrival in Bright Falls. We'll figure out who that boss is soon. But not soon enough, because although Alan literally took on the entire police force and a sentient tractor to get here on time, Mott the camo kidnapper doesn't show. Alan, again a better man than me, waits there from noon until dark until he finally gets a phone call from Mott. Mott tells Alan the plans have changed, and to meet him at Mirror Peak ASAP. Alan notices a boat on the surface of the lake near where Tom's cabin used to be, the one that they'd arrived at on the first day. The massive dark presence appears to be moving toward Mirror Peak at the same time Alan is.
Shit.
It beats him there, and we overhear Mott the kidnapper screaming for mercy.
Sorry, please, wait! The boss didn't know who he was messing with. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. We don't have his wife. We don't know where she is. She's probably drowned. We just said we had her to make a play ball. You see? They got him writing for us.
Alan overhears this bombshell and approaches Mott, who is visibly shaken and cowering on the ground. Just then, the image of Barbara Jagger flashes in front of Alan, and Mott is swept up into the air. The sound of Mott's bones crunching and his body being torn can be heard. Alan gets picked up as well, but at the last second lights a flare, so the darkness drops him down into the lake below. From under the surface, Alan sees the boat he'd noticed earlier, and a hand reach down into the water toward him. Here comes Chapter 4, where Remedy decided to totally screw with our heads. Alan awakens again, but this time to Dr. Emil Hartman standing over him. Hartman says he needs to calm down.
You're a patient at my clinic. Have been for a while now. The shock of your wife's death triggered a mental illness.
No, you lie.
You're suffering from various symptoms of undifferentiated schizophrenia.
Fully awakening sometime later, we see we're in one of the rooms at Hartman's psychiatric clinic lodge. The door is locked, an IV sits next to the bed, and there's a typewriter placed on the desk in the corner. It doesn't look like Alan's written anything though, as all of the pages on the desk are blank. Dr. Hartman enters the room, and with his orderly as backup. Apparently Alan has been a difficult patient and has resisted most forms of treatment. Under threat of being sedated again, Alan joins Hartman on a tour of the clinic.
I specialize in treating artists.
I bet you do.
He explains to Alan that Alice died when she fell into the water at Cauldron Lake. Her death by drowning sent Alan into a mental health spiral that has caused him to hallucinate and see his dreams as reality. He refused to accept his wife's death, instead choosing to believe that supernatural forces were keeping her prisoner. Hartman continues to say that so far, no one in Bright Springs has actually died except for Alice. Everything following her drowning has all been Alan's false reality. Carl Stuckey, Barbara Jagger, Mott the kidnapper, the Bright Falls police force, all of it.
My rheumatism is killing me.
Hartman reminds us of who these two were. They led a rock band in the 70s and 80s called the Old Gods of Asgard and adopted the names Thor and Odin to fit the Viking persona. Thor's always got some form of hammer with him, and Odin may or may not have pulled out one of his own eyes to look like Odin from Norse mythology. An unexpected storm starts to roll in, so Dr. Hartman leaves to go make sure the power supply is ready for it. Before he goes, he encourages Alan to go back to his room and start writing again. The moment he walks out of the door,
I'd like to bash his head in with a hammer.
They say that Dr. Hartman always tries to fish out their secrets by getting them to write more music, but they don't give him the satisfaction. They don't call Alan Alan though, they call him Tom and Zane, obviously mistaking him for Thomas Zane the poet. They keep insisting they were huge rock stars, but Alan's never heard of them. The brothers are clearly too hopped up on Hartman's prescriptions to go into detail.
Put it all down, lest we forget. A crash course. All you need to know to get your head right. You need to find the message.
Odin shows us that he smuggled in a manuscript page in his jacket, probably from their most recent adventure sneaking out of the lodge, and hands it over to Alan. The page describes Thomas Zane being afraid of what he wrote when his poems started to happen in real life, but his assistant, Emil, kept him writing. According to this page, Dr. Hartman was Thomas Zane's assistant. If that's true, he'd have to know about the power of Cauldron Lake. He'd have to know about the power of the manuscript pages, right? But then again, if all this is just a fantasy in Alan's head, what is there to even know? Still unsure of what to make of all this, but pretty sure Hartman's a lying sack of potatoes, Alan sits at the typewriter and tries to write again. He still can't bring himself to do it, and the sounds of a scuffle erupt downstairs. Upon inspection, we see Thor has knocked out a nurse with an actual hammer, and the large orderly is hiding from the geriatric duo in the staff room. Alan just takes the opportunity to snatch the unconscious nurse's keys. To be honest, I missed all of what we're about to see on my first playthrough, and I'm still mad at myself for it. First off, a huge photo on the wall shows all the clinic staff. And who is front and center? Our camo-clad, frat candle-inhaling fake kidnapper himself, Mott. He did have a boss, it turns out, and his boss was Dr. Emil Hartman. But the biggest bombshell discovery here comes from the tape recorder on the table. One of the tapes is labeled Alice Wake.
Now, Mrs. Wake, can you tell me about Alan's problems?
He doesn't let me in anymore. He just keeps me in the dark. I'm so alone here, even when he's home. Please help me, Doctor, because I'm at my wit's end.
Well, if you can just get him here, I'll absolutely do my very best.
Yeah, but Doctor, you need to be careful with him. He's not just going to listen to you and cooperate. He's the most stubborn man I've ever met.
The broken up calls he'd heard from Mott the kidnapper, where he supposedly put Alice on the phone, were actually bits and pieces of this conversation that was recorded. Moving to Hartman's office, we hear a familiar voice yelling out.
Let me out of here! Hartman, do you hear me? I'm gonna sue your crazy quack ass to shreds!
Barry?
Ow! About time!
Barry! Man, am I glad to see you.
He says he came here looking for Alan, but Hartman's orderly had locked him in this room with no way out. Alan opens the doctor's office with the keys, and right on the table is a stack of manuscript pages. Hartman steps into the room and tries to talk Alan not to slip back into his fantasy, but Alan picks up the revolver on the desk and holds him at gunpoint. He tells Barry to find a car, and Hartman to tell the truth, and with that, Hartman finally comes clean. Alan's not crazy. It's all been real up to this point. Good, thank you God for not wasting our time, Remedy. Hartman's got Alan here because he wants to partner with him, be a producer of sorts.
Don't you see? Together we can create something absolutely wonderful.
When Alan had refused to come to the clinic earlier in the game, he staged a kidnapping to try and convince Alan to write more. It's also been the purpose behind running this entire clinic. Hartman has spent decades looking for someone he can use to take advantage of Cauldron Lake's ability to make works of art come true. The Dark Presence infiltrates the lodge. Alan locks Dr. Hartman in the room with it. He smiles as Hartman's screams go quiet. Physical darkness is manifesting throughout the lodge, blocking off exits and possessing objects. Outside, the darkness can be seen completely enveloping the lodge by this point, searching every inch of it for Alan.
Oh God! Look at the house, Al!
After a tense standoff against waves of Taken where we wait for Barry to unlock the gate, we're finally free to leave Hartman's lodge. It's now completely overrun by the Dark Presence. Alan, Barry, and a cutout of Alan in the back seat are driving full speed to get out of there. Barry pleads with Alan for them to leave Bright Falls, but Alan insists they need to go to the Anderson farm to find the brothers' songs. He explains that Cauldron Lake is somehow able to make all works of art come to life. It did it with Thomas Zane's poems in the 70s, the Anderson brothers' songs in the 80s, and now it's doing it with Alan's manuscript. But the catch is that every time, the Dark Presence twists the art in some way to make itself stronger, with its end goal being to be set free from Cauldron Lake, free to kill and consume everyone in Bright Falls, and maybe even beyond that. If Alan can listen to the Anderson songs, he might be able to figure out how to both trap the darkness forever and get Alice back. Not a fan of being trapped for eternity, the Dark Presence throws some rocks at their car, causing it to crash over the side of a cliff. Alan and Barry are separated, but they both start to head the same direction. And this is where we get to one of the most memorable sequences of the entire game. So far, Remedy has told us that the Anderson brothers were rock stars. We've heard about it a couple of times, we've read about it in some manuscripts, but so far we haven't seen anything to back that up. Remedy could have been content just doing that, but oh no. They sent us to the Anderson farm, and they're going to show us just what kind of rock stars the old gods of Asgard really were. Approaching a giant stage in the middle of the farm, we see Barry get surrounded by a group of Taken. Just as they're about to deliver the final blow, a bolt of lightning strikes the top of the stage, and the giant fire-breathing dragon stage piece activates, setting the Taken aflame and saving Barry in the last second. The entire stage powers on at this point, complete with stage lights, fireworks, and music straight from the old gods themselves. I unironically think this song that plays is an absolute banger, and it may or may not be in my snowboarding playlist right next to Goofy Goober Rock. So begins a sequence where we are holding off huge swarms of Taken while Barry activates stage lights to help us out, all to the absolute metal soundtrack with lyrics that directly reference fighting the Taken and Barbara Jagger with light. Here's a snippet of it. The whole segment gives off massive Eddie shredding Metallica in the Upside Down vibes. The metal gets so out of hand, a nearby shed explodes, opening a path for you to the farmhouse.
That was awesome!
Bright Falls, rock and roll capital of America.
Finally entering the Anderson house, we turn on the power and hear the record player stuck downstairs on one line from a song.
Can you hear that, Al? Music?
Uncatching it gives us the following lyrics. Alan and Barry figure out they need to find the Lady of the Light, and there's only one person that can be. Cynthia Weaver, the lamp lady. They decide to wait until morning to leave, and since they have some hours to kill, they do the sensible thing and dig into a couple of bottles of that old Anderson Brothers moonshine. Little do they know, an ingredient to the moonshine is unfiltered water from Cauldron Lake itself, and after they both slip into a booze snooze, Alan is sent back to Diver's Isle in his mind. The moonshine's giving him an out-of-body experience, and we're about to finally witness what happened the night Alice went missing. After Alan jumped into the black water, he re-emerged on the dock. He couldn't find Alice. While he's in big baby sad mode, Barbara Jagger approaches him.
Look at the cabin. Is there someone in the window?
Alice?
Maybe she didn't drown after all. Maybe she's inside.
Alice!
Yes. She must be here somewhere. Maybe upstairs in the study.
Alice!
Yes, that's where she is. You can apologize.
Alice!
Upon entering the study with Alice nowhere to be seen, Jagger does a 180 and tells Alan,
She's not here. You were foolish to think so. No, she's dead. She drowned.
No, no, no!
It's your fault your wife is dead. You are guilty. All she wanted was to help you right. You killed her.
Big baby sad re-engaged. But fret not, she tells Alan.
Cauldron Lake is a special place. Here, you have the power to change things.
If you ever want to see her again, you'll have to write her back, and you're going to have to do as I say if you want it to work properly. Going into a zombified state, Alan agrees and begins to write. For a full week, Alan is trapped here, writing for Jagger the manuscript pages we've been finding all over the place. Jagger has been forcing Alan to turn the story into a horror story, and taken over more and more of where the story goes, with the intention being to free itself, not Alice. This is where Alan decided to make himself the protagonist of the story, and where he discovered Thomas Zane's poems in a shoebox and learned about his previous history with the Dark Presence. Alan knew the inevitable ending would be darkness escaping and consuming everything, so even in his trance, he was able to write an escape for himself. Zane's body died in 1970, but his essence is still alive, now acting as a bright presence, weaker than the Dark Presence, but still there. He arrives at the cabin in his diver's suit.
It isn't here now. I'm here because it was written. I brought the light to set you free.
We already knew that Thomas Zane has been the voice from the light, but now we know he's also responsible for scattering the manuscript pages around Bright Falls for people and Alan to find. His light allows Alan a brief moment of sanity, and Alan uses it to escape. While Zane grabs the manuscript pages, the Dark Presence senses what is happening and returns, only to find Alan already gone. It attacks Zane, weakening him even more than he already was, and leaving behind one unfinished page. Still groggy, Alan drives away, but goes through a guardrail and crashes the car. It was when he woke up from this crash that Alan had lost his memory of the previous week, and our journey as the player began.
I wrote it. It's my fault.
That's right, James Joyce. It's your fault, and you're gonna pay for it.
Time-lapsing into the next night, Deerfest has begun, and with such a big influx of people coming to the town to celebrate, you know the Dark Presence is just thinking,
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys!
Meanwhile, Alan and Barry are hung over in a jail cell at the sheriff's station.
Oh, I am never drinking again.
Sheriff Breaker and Agent Nightingale, who is holding Alan's manuscript, walks up to the cell, still arguing with each other. The sheriff actually has 2 brain cells to rub together, so she's figured out he's not there on official business. The power goes out, and Wake keels over having a vision of Alice stuck in the dark place. The sheriff enters the cell to check on him, and, as expected, Agent Goob pulls his gun and starts to accuse Alan of faking it.
Get back in the cell, Stephen King! The only way you're leaving this place is over my dead...
Wait a minute.
Oh my god!
So yes, this antagonist just got Supreme Leader Snoked, being ripped out of the story before actually making enough of a difference to it, but oh well, at least the most obnoxious character is out of our hair for now. Sheriff Breaker turns on the, breaker, and gives us our weapons and flashlight back.
Here are your things. Wake, what do I need to know? What do you need from me?
They can be hurt in the light, only in the light, and I need to find Cynthia Weaver. She can help me stop this.
The sheriff tells us that Cynthia lives inside the old power plant because, of course she does, and the quickest way there will be for us to take the rescue chopper from the fire station. Stepping directly into Silent Hill, seriously, look at this side by side. Alan and Sheriff Breaker have to fight their way through newly taken townspeople and tourists. It's an all-out assault now, with the Dark Presence pulling no punches in what it throws at us. Every type of Taken we've seen so far, in addition to new ones, in a sort of hilarious visual, the Deerfest float that's popped up a few times shreds down the street as a taken object and tries to run you over. I really had my fingers crossed for a boss fight with this thing, but alas, one dodge will have to do. Missed opportunity if you ask me. During your trip through town, you come across Barry absolutely hauling it towards you from down the street.
Oh god! Oh god!
The Dark Presence is hot on his tail, hurling vehicles around him and trapping him inside the general store.
Did you call 911?
It's Barry, fully decked out in Christmas lights with a headlamp on his forehead.
What are the Christmas lights for?
Protection, man! Like garlic against vampires?
The trio finally make it to the fire station and work on starting up the rescue chopper. The darkness is now literally throwing everything it possibly can at Alan Wake. Narrowly escaping, on the fly over to the power plant, a flock of taken birds fly at the chopper and interrupt the flight, forcing Alan to hop out and trek through the transformer yard on foot. Looks like we finally get to meet the person who's been keeping our ammo pouches full and has single-handedly provided all of Energizer's company income for the last 40 years.
Hold it right there!
Miss Weaver! Cynthia! I'm a friend!
Prove it!
You knew Zane! Thomas Zane! You're the Lady of the Light in the song! You can help me!
About time! Young man, I've been waiting a very long time for you.
For the last 4 decades, she's been protecting something we need, and it's located in what she calls the well-lit room. It is here that we are finally able to piece together the full backstory of Bright Falls and Cauldron Lake. Well, the backstory from 1970 onwards, at least. Tom, a world-famous poet and avid diver, liked to write and dive at Diver's Isle. Cynthia Weaver, in her 20s at the time, was in love with him, but he took to Barbara Jagger instead. Barbara was Tom's muse, inspiring him to write all sorts of poems that started to alter the very reality around them. Not fully realizing the source of the power or the danger that lurked within Cauldron Lake, Barbara was taken and killed by the Dark Presence while swimming. Tom, unaware that writing new reality at Cauldron Lake had its own rules, tried to write Barbara back. He wrote without a balance, a definitively happy ending, so the Dark Presence abused a loophole in the writing to bring Barbara back, but only her face. It now wore her corpse like a suit and pretended to be Barbara Jagger. Acting as Tom's muse and disguised as his love, the Dark Presence persuaded Tom to write more and more in its favor. Tom eventually caught on that something was wrong, so he tied her to a chair and attempted to cut out her heart. What he found instead was pure darkness where her heart should have been. He knew he couldn't just write the Dark Presence out of existence, and creating reality required balance, sacrifices. Tom wrote himself out of the world, including his fame as a poet anywhere outside of Bright Falls. He wrote that he could only leave behind something if it remained in his shoebox in the cabin. He wrote a role for Cynthia Weaver, possibly manipulating her because he knew of her feelings toward him as the Lady of the Light. It would be her task to protect one item in particular and the town by providing as many light sources as possible and placing caches of supplies strategically around Bright Falls. Only those who have been touched by the darkness can see the paint. She would have to do this until the writer arrived. He also wrote some more about events to come, we'll see exactly what later. Tom grabbed the Dark Presence that was wearing Barbara's face and dove straight to the bottom of Cauldron Lake in his suit to take on the darkness face to face. Thomas Zane sacrificed himself, trapped the Dark Presence, and caused the eruption under the lake in 1970. This encounter is what led him instead to become the Bright Presence, or perhaps just the face for the Bright Presence like Barbara is for the Dark Presence. This temporarily weakened the Dark Presence, trapping it beneath Cauldron Lake, until the Anderson brothers began writing music the next decade. The brothers accidentally helped give the Dark Presence enough power to be able to navigate around Bright Falls, inspiring the local scary stories about Barbara Jagger, the Scratching Hag. Cynthia proves yet again she's thought of every conceivable way to stay out of the dark. We could go outside and walk to the well-lit room that's underneath the nearby dam, but instead she's lined an entire underground pipe with lights so the journey can be made at night. Turns out the well-lit room is an abandoned army base, and according to Cynthia, there's not a single shadow in the entire room.
Take it, and I won't need to worry about the room anymore, because 6 and 33 and 118 need changing soon, and I don't want to climb up the ladder to change them because it's very late and I'm tired. And if you take it, I won't have to do that anymore.
This is where we get weird. Well, even weirder than we've already gotten. Alan opens Thomas Zane's shoebox in the center of the room, which is odd because his shoebox was totally in the cabin with us in the beginning, and inside of it he finds the clicker from his childhood? You know, the clicker he'd given Alice years ago during the blackout in their apartment. Weird that it's here. But even weirder, we find pages written by Thomas Zane. In them, Tom writes about Alan's childhood, how Alan was afraid of the dark and his mother gave him the clicker, and how he would find it now, in the present, and will apparently take it with him to jump into Cauldron Lake. Tom wrote about Alan before Alan was even born. Tom prepared a weapon to use against the dark presence, and he wrote about its origin in Alan's childhood. How much more of Alan's life did Thomas Zane bring to life through his writings? Now wait a minute, these pages are written autobiographically. Is Alan Wake also Thomas Zane somehow? No time to linger too long on that now. With the clicker, we have an evil entity to trap and a wife to save.
I can get to her now. I can finish this.
The page written by Tom said Alan takes the clicker to the lake, so Alan insists he's going to do this, and he's going to go alone. Barry gives Alan a tearful goodbye. No ending has been written to this story yet, and now that Alan has the clicker, the dark presence wants him dead, not captured, so all bets are off on what it will throw at him. Alan clicks the clicker, but doesn't see any immediate effect. Until he goes outside anyway. It's now daytime, seemingly instantaneously. Better to not ask questions and just take advantage of the light. We drive along the still gorgeous view of the Pacific Northwest until we come to a tunnel. Of course, the inside is dark and some stopped cars block our way, so Alan goes on foot. In the middle of the tunnel, a vision of the dark presence holding Alice invades his mind, and he hears its voice.
I will kill your wife.
Just like it had immediately turned to day, it was now nighttime again. Now it's a race against the clock to get back to Cauldron Lake before the Dark Presence does. If you thought the Dark Presence was pissed during the fight downtown, it's going all out now. It begins pulling different items that have been swallowed by Cauldron Lake over time and just chunking them through the air. A boat here, a train there. Finally, at the edge of Cauldron Lake, we reach the climax of this story. The Dark Presence is now a whirlwind of power and fury, throwing more debris at Alan as he makes his way closer. The player has to dodge obstacles and fight off flocks of birds, all the while attempting to pop off some well-placed flares at the target. The Dark Presence itself is in the center of the whirlwind, still wearing the face of Barbara Jagger. After enough flares, the Dark Presence retreats, and Alan is able to fulfill Tom's written page. Clicker in hand, he jumps into the darkness of Cauldron Lake.
Help!
He wakes up in his New York apartment yet again, next to Alice even, but this time it's not a flashback. Something's wrong. Darkness itself creeps along the windows, and Alice shows no signs of being disturbed that the lights are out.
It wasn't a dream.
Everything's fine.
Turn the lights on! Turn the lights on!
The power's out. There's no light. Come back to bed and I'll make you forget all about your fear of the dark.
Yes. Yes. Yeah!
Thankfully, Alan didn't spontaneously become a moron, so he goes to look for the clicker. Well, he realizes that he's in the dark place now, and he can will things to be created here. Gameplay-wise, that means you shine your flashlight on a written word until the object forms, and you hear the sound of a keyboard clacking as that word is written into reality. He picks up the clicker and the illusion of the apartment fades away. Thomas Zane in his diver's suit appears once more and tells Alan he must make his way to the cabin to where the Dark Presence is and fill its heart with light. We're now going to see what has been the cause of a ton of speculation about where the sequel's going to go. A perfect doppelganger of Alan has appeared, smiling with a suspicious looking grin. Tom tells us not to worry.
Don't mind him, he's Mr. Scratch. Your friends will meet him when you're gone.
And Mr. Scratch disappears, still smiling. Alan moves forward, willing different objects to become reality.
I'm leaving you.
What?
I'm leaving you, Alan. I met someone. I'm in love with someone else.
Alan insists this conversation never happened, but presses forward to the cabin. Approaching the door, we hear the sounds of Thomas Zane cutting out Barbara Jagger's heart. Only this time, Thomas Zane's voice sounds like Alan's.
To be good. Please, untie me, you naughty boy. I will help you write your masterpiece. I will love you forever.
No, you're not Barbara Jagger. I made a terrible mistake. I should have never written you back. You came back wrong. Your heart is filled with darkness.
Put that knife away, Thomas. Put it down.
Heart's filled with darkness. Cut it out. I'll take you back to the depths you paid for.
And Alice screaming at the dark presence to let her go.
Get away from me, you hag! Where am I? Let me go!
Alice! Alice! I'm coming!
Your husband refused to do as he was told. All he had to do was write what I wanted him to write. Now it's too late. It's his fault. You'll stay here forever.
Alan enters the cabin, and we finally come face to face with the dark presence. Its voice is deep, and the hole where Barbara Jagger's heart should be is on full display.
Now you will never get her back.
In true Lovecraftian entity fashion, it tells Alan it's much older than he is.
Older than your first work of art. I will find a new face to wear. Someone else to dream me free.
Alan shoves the clicker inside the opening in its chest and presses the button. With the entity now seemingly defeated, Alan is still trapped in the dark place, but he can feel Alice's presence nearby. He sits at the typewriter and begins writing the end to departure. Alan has learned from the mistakes of Thomas Zane. He knows sacrifices must be made in order to bring light back into the story. We see a clock moving backward and a time lapse of a day-night cycle. Alice Wake comes to underneath the surface of the lake and swims to the shore. Scared and alone, it's unclear if she remembers being trapped in the dark place. She screams out for Alan, but receives no reply. The festivities of Deerfest are in full swing. Different townspeople are celebrating in the streets with some confetti that's probably not biodegradable. Rose clutches a lamp, seemingly taking up the mantle of the Lady of the Light, and behind her we see Agent Nightingale staring out from the darkness. Is the dark presence wearing his face now? Either very focused or just catatonic, Alan Wake remains in the dark place, still writing.
It's not a lake. It's an ocean.
And the credits roll. What on earth did we just witness? The ambiguity of Alan Wake's story and ending has given us 13 years of speculation. Cruise around online and you can find all sorts of rabbit holes of debates and theories. What did Alan mean, it's an ocean? It's clearly a reference to Thomas Zane's poem in the dream sequence in Chapter 1. There's even more topics that remain for healthy debate, like, was the clock winding backwards just metaphorical? Or did Alan really roll back time to the day Alice went missing? Did Thomas Zane only write the clicker into Alan's life? Or did he write Alan Wake into existence? Did Alan ever actually leave the dark place after that first week? Or did he stay there, still writing, while we, the player, played as Mr. Scratch, following the rules of the story in Alan's place? If Mr. Scratch is an entity that originates from darkness, why did Thomas Zane sound so chill about sending him out into the world?
Don't mind him. He's Mr. Scratch. Your friends will meet him when you're gone.
A few things most people agree on. The events of the game really did happen, as evidenced by Rose and Nightingale's fates. Alan really is stuck in the dark place, and the dark presence is not dead, just temporarily subdued. I mean, the game Alan Wake said it best in its opening when it quoted Stephen King.
Stephen King once wrote that nightmares exist outside of logic, and there's little fun to be had in explanations. They're antithetical to the poetry of fear.